So, after doing my research in the industry, I've been noticing a pattern. And in my opinion, it's a pattern that's harming the brands and the communities that they represent. So, for this discussion, I want to briefly and very vaguely talk about the inceptions of art, why art matters, and what I believe its purpose is whenever it comes to building a brand. Before humans had the capacity for complex language, visual and nonverbal forms of communication like hand gestures, acting things out, cave painting, smoke signaling, and simple vocal sounds like grunting and change of pitch were essential for conveying messages within tribes and marking territories. This is where the inceptions of art were rooted, and it's partly the reason why today we're so captivated by communication in the form of visual storytelling as opposed to factual literature. You can watch your favorite movies all day long, but you'd go absolutely insane if you tried to read The Gulag Archipelago written by Alexander Solzhenitsyn in one sitting. Unless, of course, you're a complete psychopath, or maybe you just have nothing else better to do. So this method of communication has been ingrained in our minds by our ancestors because they needed to communicate in this way in order to survive. There's a saying that I'm sure everybody has heard. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, to our ancestors, before verbal communication existed, the pictures and the drawings that they made literally communicated 1,000 words. And they might not have been Picasso level paintings, but that didn't matter. As long as when they saw these drawings and these paintings, the hunters understood their positions and their role whenever it was time to ambush an animal so that they can have food to eat and survive. And when language models did finally enter the minds of those who came before us, things changed. A big change was the introduction of letters and constructing them into words. These words expanded to a nearly never-ending amount, and because of that, it's created a field of study called etymology, which is the study of words, such as their origins and the change in their meaning throughout history. For example, the word art originated in the Latin language as arce, which meant skill, craft, or practice. Later on, when Middle English was developing, art also developed its meaning to the growth of a skill as a result of learning or practicing. And now the modern English meaning of art has evolved to encompass the creation of beautiful and expressive works, things like sculptures, paintings, and music. Art's evolution in its meaning has proven to be impactful to a lot of people. And thanks to its current definition, a part of the population have been able to make a living creating and selling art. Through their paintings, music, TikTok lives, and YouTube videos, a person can now generate an income. Now, it's not like this is a newly discovered occupation for modern society, because in truth, human beings have been able to gain status by virtue of their art for centuries. As far back as the medieval times. A good example back then were the blacksmiths, who were essential figures to daily life in their villages. They specialized in forging different metals into useful things like pots and pans, weapons, tools, and armor. I really want to stress right here that back then, the work done by the blacksmith was viewed as art in its purest form. Because if we look at the etymology of art during the medieval times when Middle English was flourishing, we can see that the meaning corresponds with the blacksmith's occupation. He is developing a skill as a result of practicing or learning to forge hot metal. Now, having said that, if a blacksmith was working in your town today, and with today's definition of art, I have a feeling that the people in town wouldn't regard the blacksmith's work as an art, at least in the way that it's perceived today. And the reason for this is because of its grimy, laborious nature, and also because of the end results of the product, it no longer coincides with the modern definition of the word of art, which is to create something beautiful with an emotional power. And sure, one can appreciate the skill it takes for a blacksmith to forge a piece of hot metal into a weapon or a tool, but at the end of the day, their art serves for functionality and utility instead of beauty and expression. So the people in town would, in all likelihood, compare the blacksmith's work to a job like mining or construction or butchering instead of something like musical composition, literary works, or oil painting. And I think that this change in what's regarded as art has to do with the different circumstances that we live in. Because back then, food, shelter, medicine, and protection wasn't as common or as available as it is today. I mean, I guess things still aren't as available today, but it's certainly the case that things are more abundant and more well understood, at least in the place where I live, like medicine. Back then, it was still in its preliminary stages, and the people in the medical field were still trying to work things out. And now, after centuries of working things out, we have the antibodies, the antiviruses, and the medicine to cure a lot of the diseases and illnesses that were once a real problem to human beings in the past. So the scarcity of all of these things fueled the people with a sense of desperation. Riots and violence would erupt in towns, and villages would often raid other villages for their resources. Oh, and of course, they had to deal with the bubonic plague along with an assortment of other diseases and illnesses which they had no cure for at the time. So there's that. These harsh living conditions meant that the people didn't have the freedom of creating art the same way we can in present day. There was never an opportunity for creating leisurely art, maybe among the higher or more noble classes, but by and large, the general population were too busy just trying to live to see the next day. So instead of creating paintings and music and writing books, things that would typically fall into the category of leisurely art, the people in the medieval times focused on creating necessary art, things like architecture, medicinal practicing, and iron forging, just to name a few. There is a distinction between both forms of art, and to put it simply, leisurely art is the surplus of a productive economy, and necessary art is the shortage of a productive economy. Both call for a level of skill, but I would argue that necessary art, particularly the one in the medieval times, is more of a physically demanding skill, and leisurely arts, the one we see more common today, is more of a mentally demanding skill. And you can see proof of this whenever you compare the religious buildings. In the past, oftentimes it would take almost half a century to complete just one cathedral due to the design's intricacies and the attention to detail that the builders focus on the architecture. And now, at least where I live, I don't know about you, but I seem to come across a new church getting built every other year, shaped like a shoebox. You know, it's almost as if the churches today are built in a rush for a reason, not for the sincerity or the divinity of the religion, but for something else. Perhaps for land ownership so that they can maybe move money and possibly traffic. The blacksmith made art because it was necessary. And it was a necessary art insofar as if he didn't create it, then he could lose his status and income, or he could be denied the ration of bread for that week. They could even be removed from a shelter that they've been provided with. These were all ways of compensating the blacksmith for his work and for his art. Nowadays, because of the internet, we have the option of compensation through likes, views, streams, and followers for the art that we create. which could then be translated into money later if we play our cards right. This shift of focus from a necessary art to a leisurely art is part of the problem that I'm noticing with startup businesses. And I don't know if it applies to all types of business, but it's certainly the case with businesses in the clothing brand industry. If you're going to build a brand, then in my opinion, the marketing aspect must be treated as an art. And I see too many business owners treating it as a leisurely art instead of a necessary art. And I'm not saying that leisurely art is bad for marketing, because looks and aesthetics do matter. But my concern comes from brand owners only focusing on the attraction and not paying enough attention to the moral principles and the functionality of the brand. There's 3 reasons why business owners really follow the beauty. The first is, that's just human nature. If you're a boy or a man, then you understand perfectly what I mean. But the second is that they do not know why the art matters. And it matters for the same reason that it mattered for the blacksmith whenever they were forging sharp and durable swords for the men going to war. They did it in a way to cooperate in keeping the village safe, for one, and he also did it to connect with the people. By integrating his skill to support them, he then becomes one with the people. And the blacksmith does this sort of in a way to thank them for accepting his presence into the community. So too, as a brand, the quality of the marketing directly links to the strength of its community. And the efforts that the brand owner gives in their art, the marketing, showcases how much that they care about the community. You can think of the blacksmith as the brand along with its owner. The sword, which is the art, as the marketing, and the village, think of it as the brand's community. Now, ask yourself this: would you rather want to live in a village with an ignoble blacksmith working a couple of days a week, making pleny of swords, but their rush in work means that the craftsmanship in their art, in the sword, is sloppy and dull? Or would you rather live in a village with a noble blacksmith working 24/7, not making as much swords as the previous blacksmith, but his attention to detail means that the craftsmanship in his swords are sharper and sturdy? I don't know about you, but I would want to live in the latter village, because you can see that the blacksmith takes pride in his craft, and you can also trust that his art, his swords, will protect you if your village was ever attacked. The point that I'm trying to make here is that as a business owner of a clothing brand, you should work to constantly provide and protect the community you and the brand are creating. But that isn't what's happening. After doing my research, what I'm noticing is a lot of ignoble blacksmiths trying to build a business today, and it's creating weak communities as a consequence. You can see it right away in the art, in the marketing. Brands on social media create a design they think looks cool. They plaster it on a shirt, throw the product on a model, and sometimes they skip this step and just throw it on the ground or maybe put it on a hanger. They then take a couple of pictures and videos and post it on social media for the world to see. You know, this is fine if your only goal is to make a quick profit. But if you want to change people's perspective, and if you're planning to sustain a village, a community of like-minded individuals, then you can't rely solely on the aesthetics of the business, the brand, and the product. You will also need to frame the ethics around it, a philosophy for the culture to adhere to. Brand owners today are avoiding forging their own sword. And the reason for this is simple. They've gotten impatient and they've gotten lazy. They no longer see that it's worth it, or they simply do not care enough to stop for a moment and consider what problem it is in the world that they would like to resolve, or the reason that their brand should even exist for that matter. You know, I see these names all over social media like Instagram and Facebook with communities entirely grounded on the looks of the brand. They don't know where they come from, they don't know who they are, and they don't know where they are going. All because the founder hasn't taken the time to build a reliable ethos for the community. The values, the purpose, the identity, the history of the story, the name, the logo, the voice, the mission, the vision, the message, and more. All of these things have to correlate with each other and sort of work in tandem so that they can build a strong brand presence that resonates with its audience. When this is done right, what happens in return is a harmonious world where people can feel seen when they enter this atmosphere. And by atmosphere, I'm referring to the community created by the brand, but I'm also speaking in the grand scheme of things, of the atmosphere of this world. You know, it's a universal human desire for people to want to feel seen here on earth, and clothing is one of those channels that people use to achieve this desire. Whether consciously or unconsciously, what a person puts on their body is a representation of how they would like to be recognized by others. The third reason why business owners are not including necessary arts has to do with their misusage of art's purpose. And for this explanation, I'm going to be using Leo Tolstoy's essay titled, "What is Art?" But before I do, I mentioned in the beginning that I've been studying the competition and how they market themselves. And their strategy indicates to me that their understanding of art's purpose is to simply please the eye. In other words, they utilize art strictly as an aesthetic device. Tolstoy acknowledges that art does have its place for aesthetic appeal. He doesn't deny or push this away. But he also lets his readers know that art has a more profound and crucial purpose in its role with society. He lays this out in one of his chapters. Quote, "Art is one of two organs of human progress. By words, man interchanges thoughts. By the forms of art, he interchanges feelings. And this is with all men, not only of the present time, but also of the past and of the present. It is natural to human beings to employ both these organs of intercommunication, and therefore the perversion of either of them must cause evil results to the society in which it occurs." End quote. So, what is art? While Tolstoy admits that we can matter-of-factly say it is sculptures, it is paintings, it's architecture, it's plays, and so on, that answer doesn't really tell us what it is that unites all of these things as an art. To Tolstoy, art was more than a pretty picture. It was a form of communication, a way of transmitting the feelings of the artist to the audience. And furthermore, he believed that when these feelings were transmitted, it built an infectious and harmonious bond between them, fortifying their relationship and serving humanity's spiritual and emotional needs, and thereby fulfilling art's much greater purpose for the world, which to him was the progress of human civilization. Art, to me, is a language. It is the language of emotions, and emotions that come from the heart. It's one of the few languages where, even if it's just for a brief moment, without even saying a word sometimes, we may be able to recognize ourselves in the other. And yes, one form of art is to cause provocation and to demand answers, to question hypocrisies, and to put up a mirror to the societies in which we live in, to be controversial and challenging. But another aspect in art is also to try and build bridges, and to actually be an alternative form of dialogue, and to be a form of dialogue that actually connects to people's hearts. So to end this, I want to say to the consumers, which is you and me and everybody, to pause for a moment. The next time that you're out buying a t-shirt, a cologne, perfume, a new pair of shoes, a pretzel at a stand, I don't care, it could be anything really. And ask yourself, why this brand? What is it that they make me feel or want to make me feel? What does this brand stand for, and what are they communicating? If you find that there is no emotional connection, maybe there's not even an attempt to connect, not even emotionally, but just conversationally, and you realize that you're buying the product only for its looks, for the aesthetic, and or for the taste, in the case that you're buying a cake, then you should start to wonder if that business that you're consuming from even cares about you, but more importantly, cares about human civilization in its entirety, which is largely driven by communication and connection. And since you were prepared to buy that product and ready to support its modus vivendi in a way, then my question to you as their supporter is straightforward. Do you even care?